Don't know. How are we doing for sound? Can you hear me at the back? Do I need a hand mic? No. Okay. I've been told I can't wander around the stage, but I am allowed to dance.
Yay!
So I can't guarantee that I won't be doing that. I'm so excited to be here. I'm here today to talk to you about empathy. Empathy is a long-standing obsession of mine, and it's absolutely core to my own values. I'm also a civil servant, so I work for the government. Now, empathy and government are two words that you rarely hear uttered in the same breath. I can't think why. And this next few minutes is me telling you about my adventures over the last few months, trying to bridge the gap between these two disparate passions that I have. So if you don't know what the civil service does, we exist to help politicians get stuff done. So our stated aim is we help the government of the day to implement its policies. And what a policy is a really simple thing. It's government's approach to a societal need, a need we all have. How do we design our healthcare system? How do we treat people in prisons? Where do we build our road and rail network? These are all policies. And many of these policies become services that you interact with every single day. So whether you're registering to vote, or you're applying for a passport, or you're getting cancer treatment, there are dozens, if not hundreds, of civil servants and public servants behind the decisions that make the interactions that you experience from the state every single day. So, as civil servants, what do we need to do to make our ideas and our policies good? Well, we need to make them a few really obvious things. They need to be affordable, because the state is big and gnarly and expensive. We need to make them operationally viable, so we are living in reality land, because we like a bit of reality. And we need to make them politically and culturally acceptable. There is a whole separate talk about how you do that, which I won't focus on for now. But over and above all of those things, we need to make our ideas and our policies effective. And by effective, I mean something extremely specific. Almost every government policy is designed to affect behavioral change. So we make things happen to make you do stuff. So we want you to pay your taxes on time, we might give you a tax break. Maybe not. We want the population to get fitter. We might tax sugary drinks, or we might build bike lanes. These are all policies that you might experience. In order to do that well, we have to accurately predict what you might do if we make these different changes. So we have to understand human motivation. We have to be able to walk in your shoes. That's empathy. We need empathy to do our jobs every single day. And empathy can make or break how good public policy is, and I'll give you an example. In 1920, a group of largely white, Christian, affluent, teetotal policymakers wanted people to drink less. Now, they had certain policy options about how they did this. They could have taxed it, very popular. They could have made a moral case against it. They decided to ban alcohol. So they gave us prohibition. They thought, in their homogenous little policymaking bubble, that banning alcohol would make people stop drinking alcohol. Oops, they failed to act with empathy. And what the US population realized was something which one of the great thinkers of our time, Homer Simpson, expressed very well 70 years later was this: alcohol is the cause of and solution to all of humanity's problems. Most of us like a pint after work, right? Nothing new there. So this policy went ahead with predictable outcomes. And as another great thinker of our time, Calvin, not John Calvin, but Calvin and Hobbes Calvin, said, how can something that seems so plausible be in retrospect so idiotic? So this policy played out with predictable outcomes, right? There was a huge upsurge in organized crime. There was a huge loss of tax revenue for the US government and a tiny drop in alcohol consumption, no pun intended. So here's my idea. I think public servants need to become experts in the practice of empathy. If we don't, we waste money, we waste time, and we let you all down, and we can't afford to do that, financially or morally. So how do you create empathy in an organization like the civil service? It's very hierarchical and very highly structured. Well, I don't know the full answer to that, but I think I've got 3 things which will get us towards it, which will start to bridge that gap between us and you, between government and people. The first one's an absolute no-brainer, and Charlotte said it already. Shut up and listen is what we need to do. So it should be an imperative of every civil servant and every public servant to talk to real people early on in our policy development cycle about how our ideas will impact them. There's a really simple philosophy of how you predict somebody's behavior is by asking them how they'll behave. Deceptive, right? It's seldom we actually do that. So we need to go out to talk to people, and we need the humility to listen when people say that our ideas are not good enough, and the boldness to iterate our ideas based on that. Secondly, diversity and inclusion is absolutely at the heart of all this stuff. Now, the civil service is getting more diverse and more inclusive, and that's brilliant. But we need to focus more on recruitment from different socioeconomic groups. So diversity of viewpoint, breadth of experience, these are the things that give us the collective empathy that we need to get better at what we do. And thirdly, something I'm really passionate about is rewarding and role modeling empathetic behavior. And that's all about amplifying the many civil servants who already think in these ways, normalizing the language of empathy, which is the language of base human emotion, love, hope, despair, fear. We need to be able to talk about these things, and creating a space to have a different conversation. Now, I have habits of creating spaces for different conversations compulsively, and that's what I've been doing these last few months. So I wanted to create a space to have an empathy-focused conversation with a load of public servants, and I did a little experiment. So in June, I got 200 public servants, policymakers, frontline staff, designers, developers, charities, different groups to come together to talk about empathy-driven ways of making government better. And what was heartening about that is it really resonated with people. People like to get permission to care hard about human outcomes, and I loved that. What I learned from that experience was to bridge the gap between government and people, we first need to bridge the gap between ourselves. So we need high empathy between the different professions in government. So that event was really cool. We had lots of fun, and I wanted to carry on the conversation. So I created an empathy-driven reform movement for government, and we called it One Team Government. It's the idea of singularity. And what I mean by a movement is we created more of these conversations. So more events. We've got meetups. We have a breakfast meeting every Wednesday in the Treasury building, right in the heart of Whitehall, which I just think is absolutely brilliant. We created principles about what we do. The first one, it won't surprise you, is to care deeply about citizens and their feelings and their outcomes. And we put these words in. We'll be distinguished by our empathy towards people and towards each other. And we underpinned that with a bunch of other principles. Openness, diversity and inclusion, working across boundaries, experimenting with ideas. And this was my attempt to codify empathy for the public sector. So, we had these events, we had these principles. We started to amplify good practice, started to turn up the dial on the people who were already doing this stuff. And what we've seen as a result of that is these principles are coming up, they're popping up in the normal machinery of government, something which I think is really cool. We see them in job ads now, and procurement documents and corporate circulars. People are really getting on board with this stuff. Empathy is going mainstream, and it's not just in the UK. So we've been contacted by about a dozen foreign governments interested in the principles that we're working to. They want to come and talk to us about them and then take them back into their own domains. And there are so many of them, we're going to hold a global event next summer called One Team Government Global to talk about how we use empathy-driven reform right across the world to share common problems. So this is super cool, right? What have I learned from this experience? I've learned that there's value in daring to think differently. There is value in changing our conversation. And it's amazing how many people agree with you when you start to do that, and they wouldn't have had a chance to say it before. I've learned that empathy is here already. It already exists in the public sector in absolute spades. You just need to give people something to coalesce around and to normalize the people who are already doing this stuff. And lastly, I learned something which I never, ever experienced before and which I never anticipated, and that's that we're harnessing a future style of leadership. These people, normalizing them, legitimizing their language and their thoughts and bringing them together has given them the confidence to speak up. People who are more open, more porous, more borderless, high empathy people. They tend to be younger and need a voice. And I love the fact that we've done that. So that's it. I'm going to leave you with one thought. In public service, we need to be cool-headed, but we need to be warm-hearted too. And empathy is at the heart of doing that. Thank you.